I'm going to be reading from The Gifts of the Spirit, written by and for the United Church of Canada, 2006. We are each given particular gifts of the Spirit for the sake of the world. God calls all followers of Jesus to Christian ministry. In the church, some are called to specific ministries of leadership, both lay and ordered. Some witness to the good news. Some uphold the art of worship. Some comfort the grieving and guide the wandering. Some build up the community of wisdom. Some stand with the oppressed and work for justice. To embody God's love in the world, the work of the church requires the ministry and discipleship of all believers. Well, I know that a number of you are former teachers. How many of you there are you? Oh, come on. Really? Oh, okay. I see one back there. Yep, doesn't want to admit it, but there she is. Yeah, most of us can remember a story about a teacher who influenced us. Does anybody, you don't have to tell it, does anybody have a story that comes to mind? Maybe, okay. Well, I'm going to tell you a story about my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Smith. In those days, we didn't know our teachers' first names, so he was Mr. Smith. And that was in grade 6, and it was the year of my first surgery. And my mother would pick me up at lunchtime, bring me home, and then drive me back. But on this particular day, she wasn't able to drive me back. So we arranged for Mr. Smith to come and pick me up and drive me home. Well, we got to the parking lot, and there was this big snowbank all around it. And I couldn't get over it with my crutches. So Mr. Smith decided to pick me up and carry me into the school. And I was looking at all my friends going, oh, I'm going to get so teased about this, you know. What I hadn't counted on was how many of these girls had a crush on him. And so they came to me and said, oh, what was it like being in his arms? And of course I played it up, you know. I nearly swooned, you know. So that's how I remember Mr. Smith. Now, the writer of Ecclesiastes has been called the teacher. He is identified with Solomon, or perhaps someone in Solomon's court. And there may have been more than one writer. And a lot of Ecclesiastes is very gloomy. You know, it's all about all is vanity. You know, there is nothing worthwhile under the sun, that kind of thing. But he breaks out into a different tone in the passage we heard Jamie read from Ecclesiastes 1-13. And almost everyone knows some of this. For everything there is a season. It's just one of those things that even people who don't belong to any kind of a church seem to know. And a lot of the times people ask for it to be read at funerals. I've also had it requested for weddings because it is about the cycle of life, both birth and death. Now, some people also know it because there was a song in the 60s, very popular, by a group called the Byrds. Turn, turn, turn. I see you're smiling. You remember it. And the form of this reading is very easy to listen to. The word time is repeated over and over. Because for the writer of Ecclesiastes, the word time is paramount. Using time or wasting time are themes that weave throughout the writing. In this section, each line is coupled with a pair of opposites. So they make each other a whole, a time to be born, a time to die. Now, naturally, we lean towards the one things that we think of are good, not so much towards the other things. But the lesson of Ecclesiastes is that you can't have one without the other. Some of this is hard to hear. A time to kill. Well, that seems to be running counter to the commandment that says thou shalt not kill. But there are many instances in the Bible where not only are people engaged in that, but also God is sometimes the actor in this case. In the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel, the Lord kills and raises up. And in Hosea, he writes of the Lord, it is he who has torn and will heal us. He has struck down and he will bind us up. It is God who chooses life and death. It is not for mortals to make those decisions. So why does this author of Ecclesiastes say, there's a time for love and a time for hate? Well, the word for love, ahab, means a brotherly love, similar to the Greek word agapeo. The only other times that word hate is used in the Psalms, I hate the work of those who fall away. And in the Proverbs, the righteous hate falsehood. So it's that kind of hate about the people who are perceived as the enemies of God. Now, when we turn to Matthew's Gospel, he uses all of the rhetorical devices of a skilled orator. And the pronouncements of Jesus are framed between two phrases, two declarations. You have heard it said, but now I say to you. So he is setting himself up as a greater teacher in these verses. Where are they? I did write it down. But you will find it. He is not opposing the law. He's doing what in rabbinical circles is called putting a fence around the Torah, expanding it a little, but not letting it go completely haywire. And when he says to turn the other cheek, his listeners know that it's actually an insult to turn your left cheek towards someone. It's very specific. When someone slaps you on the right side, turn your left cheek. Well, that's an insult in these times. And likewise, if you're told to give both your coat and your shirt and your cloak, your outer garment and your inner garment, you're going to be standing there naked. And it is a shame for the other person to look upon you naked. It is not shameful for you. It's shameful for them. And likewise, a Roman can force any Jew to carry a load for 1 mile. Now, when Jesus says carry that load for 2 miles, what is happening is suddenly carrying that load isn't an obligation, it's a favor. Well, the writer of Ecclesiastes said, there was a time for everything. I believe this is the time. These are the days that we have been waiting for, because this is the time to act. The leaders of the latest climate summit have said, time's up. We're either for saving the planet or destroying it. And after the weather we've had this week and that may extend beyond in the summer, and what's happening in Europe and what's happening around the world with wildfires, how can we deny the reality of climate crisis? Now, what can we do? We can't all be environmental scientists. We're not international power figures who can find ways to reduce the carbon footprint. But we can act, even if it's just to avoid using non-recyclable materials. That's very easy. You take something, turn it upside down, and you look for that triangle that says if it's recyclable or not. We can take our own bag to the grocery store. And don't buy things if they're over-wrapped. Have you ever gone to something and you take a layer off, then you got to open that, and then you got to open something else, and it's all plastic? And there's no need for all of that wrapping. Look where your purchases are coming from. If I have a choice when I'm looking at the produce, I will look for what is grown locally and what might be from somewhere else. And do you really want your strawberries to have come from Mexico, where they were probably put on the truck when they were not ripe and ripened on the way? Or do you want to buy ones from a place where you know where they've come from? And some of those are local to this community, not just Ontario or Canada, but we know. We all know where the best blueberries are. I'm not going to say the name because I can't do anything commercial here, but you all know what I'm talking about. The time is now, because there won't be a future if we don't act now. Now, there are some people who look at scriptures and other things and say, well, then this must be the end of time. This is the end times. I don't know. And frankly, I don't care, because I don't think it's important. I think what's important, that every Christian should act as if Jesus is coming back any day now. Ecclesiastes says, he has also set eternity in their heart. We are the only animals on this planet that can conceive of eternity. None other does. Not the mammals, not any other animal has that awareness. So why do we have that awareness? I think it's because we know there's something beyond that. That can't be the end. We need to be ready to give an accounting of ourselves at any time. How have you loved others as yourself? Have you loved your enemies? And if you're not a Christian, then look to your own religion's traditions, because in every world religion, there are similar things that are said. What Jesus is describing is a countercultural movement. What would he say if he were here today? How would people know if you were a Christian? I don't think it would have anything to do with your bumper sticker or your fish logo, but how you treat others. Do you care for the poor and suffering? Do you stand on the side of justice for the oppressed? There's no such thing as a solitary believer. Even mystics who shut themselves away from the world, those who've done it historically and even some that do it now, are dependent on a community for support. Now, the early Christians listed a number of spiritual gifts meant for upholding the body of the church. And there are 9 of these gifts listed in Corinthians. And in Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he describes 5 specific roles in the church. And they are apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Well, the Song of Faith expands that list again. And in the section that I read earlier, these are leadership, witnessing, worship, comforting others, building up the church, and standing with the oppressed and work for justice. Well, this is a daunting task for any one person. But the word used over and over in describing these gifts are, some will be called to this, and some will be called to that. It is not meant for any one person to do all those things. And I know there are some ministers who do try to do all of those things, and frankly, I think that's the reason why so many are burning out. Because the work of the church was never meant to be done by one person. Only people that are narcissists, martyrs, or people with a hero complex would even attempt such a thing. I heard recently about a church that decided not to do an annual review of the minister. What they decided to do was to come together and set goals for the church, for all people to work towards these goals and to have some specific roles within that, so that the next year they would come together and say, how have we done? So it's not just on one person, although yes, you do need a leader to keep it from being chaotic, but it was about how have we fulfilled the mission of the church. I think that's actually a very good idea. But the time is now to decide where you stand and who you stand with. You're either on the side of people who've been racialized and marginalized, or you're not. You are on the side of saving the planet, or you're not. You want safety, security, and happiness for all of God's children, whether they are LGBTQ, trans, immigrants, people of all colors and creeds and races, or you don't. These are the times, and the clock is ticking. God has set eternity in our hearts. And the good news is that Jesus has already made that passage into eternity and is waiting there for us. Until then, let's be busy doing his work. Amen. Now, we were supposed to have
the birds.
A video. We were actually going to have the one of the birds singing "Churn, Churn, Churn," but we've got technical problems in the church today. So
Catherine's going to pick us a hymn, real quick.
Oh, are you going to pick us a hymn? Oh my goodness! Good for Catherine.
I'm putting it on you so when you know well.